People who quit their jobs on the spot, what happened? Part 2.
I got a write-up at my call center sales job, albeit being the #1 performer for the past 4 consecutive months, between 100+ employees. Even 6 years after my year at that job, my coworker said nobody has achieved my stats. Anyways, I protested my write-up and told them straight up that they had no idea what they were doing, and that an efficiency consultant would consider them dead weight and give me a management position. The corporate latte drinkers/clock watchers were offended, and gave me a final warning. I talked to my team lead about it, laid it all out and explained why I was walking off the job. He agreed with me and walked too. We got Costco hot dogs afterwards, and joined a class action lawsuit against the company later on, for other reasons.
I got a call at work from the vet saying that my senior dog, who had been acting weird and weak for the last week, was actually bleeding out internally from an aggressive cancer that had ruptured his organs. The tech read the scan that morning. Scan had been done late at night the day before, and immediately called my vet because it was that urgent. I had been at work all for an hour that day and immediately thought, I need to go home and get him put down and spend his last hours with him. I tried calling my boss, who was, per usual, not in the office, and she didn't answer. I left a voicemail. I then sent her a text and email explaining and left. Everyone in the office, including the office manager, was like, OMG, just go. Be with him. I got a text on my drive home saying, if you don't have any calls or meetings today, that's fine, but otherwise you need to stay to find someone to cover those for you. I told her I had none. She then texts again, just so you know, you don't get paid for today since you left early. First off, I'm salary, so whatever. Secondly, that was so far on my list of concerns that I didn't give an F. I arrived at my apartment and texted her from my parking lot that that's fine, this isn't working out, and we clearly have 2 very different communication styles, which will make working together difficult in the future. She texts back immediately that my resignation is accepted immediately, and she hopes I got all my stuff from my office. I then spent the next 5 hours curled up on the floor with my boy while waiting for his appointment to put him down. I adopted him when he was 9 and we had 5 great years together before he passed away. I will never regret what I did. Hell, I had a new job the following Tuesday lined up to pay me $25,000 more than what my prior employer was, so it ended up better in the long run. So, Blue, if you're out there, you're always my boy. Quit 2 times due to unfortunate urgent family scenarios. First time, my grandmother lived in the States alone. Had fallen down the stairs and laid at the bottom of the stairs for 3 days. No one could get a hold her, not uncommon, but we had a feeling, so we rushed over. Cracked her skull and had a 5% survival rate and survived. Called my boss and he told me I have to come in, young and feisty. I told him to eat AD and never showed back up. The second time, my father had surgery for his cancer, which we found out was way more advanced than we or the doctors had thought. Spent 2 weeks traveling back and forth out of town to be with him. Got a call he had fallen and went into the ICU and we needed to get there now, mind you the hospital was 2 hours away. I call my boss and tell him I can't make it and that my father's situation is bleak and he tells me that that's on me and I had to figure it out because I can't leave them hanging. All I could say was, you gotta be kidding me, did you not hear what I just said? Hung up, waited for the next manager and called back to tell him, hey, so and so said this, but my dad's dying and I have to make the decision to pull the plug. So and so can get wrecked and I quit. He apologized, could tell he was baffled and gave me 2 weeks' pay.
The first time I was accused of stealing from a small family-owned restaurant I worked at. I was under so much stress, I was only 15, my mom had just passed away, I had just gotten home from working a shift that broke child labor laws, and then I get a call from my boss, the manager, saying my register was short about $100. She said she was checking the camera and would call the police. I said go ahead. 10 minutes pass. She's blowing up my phone apologizing and begging me to come back the next day. The cameras showed the owner's wife coming in and taking money directly out of the register before I even came in for the day.
I worked for HomeGoods as my first job, and I always had to get the carts. I applied at ShopRite and interviewed for a stocking position. I made it very clear in my interview with the manager I just didn't want to have to get carts anymore and would literally do anything else. Second day on the job. Cart guy calls out. The same manager who interviewed me asked me to get carts. I gave him my apron, walked out, and applied at the pizza place next door. They didn't have any carts. It was a fun job.
I was a senior in high school, working part-time at an office supply store, but I needed extra money. My dad was a doctor, but he didn't believe in handouts, even though he inherited his business from his father. So if I wanted a car and gas money, I had to earn it myself. I used to stop by a health and fitness supply store pretty often for pre-workout and vitamins. One day, the manager and an associate convinced me to put in an application. I got hired and started working there part-time after school on nights when I wasn't at the office supply store. I was exhausted and miserable, but my coworkers were fun, and the employee discount saved me a ton. 7 days and 5 shifts in, I walked in for my shift, and the GM was there. I had never met the guy before since I was still in training. He and his assistant pulled me aside and said, "We let go of the store manager and the other associate, so you're the only one left to help run the store. We'll have people come in to assist during the transition, and if you play your cards right, you could easily have your own store." I asked, why'd they get fired? I really liked working with them. Turns out, it was over the white glove checklist. Apparently, they weren't dusting the shelves well enough. That was it. I was frustrated. The GM was 8 months pregnant, and the associate's wife had just had a baby. Later, I found out they had both recently asked for raises and time off, though at the time, all I knew was that they got canned over dusting. Toward the end of my shift, I was feeling uneasy. The only thing keeping me there was the people, and now they were gone. So I called the GM and told him, "Hey, this isn't gonna work out." He tried to talk me into staying, which pissed me off. The company really needs you. If you stick it out, you could have your own store and get a head start in life. Buddy, I was a high school senior who just wanted pre-workout. Then he asked if I'd still close the store, which involved taking the cash to the bank after locking up. I was already over it, so I said, "I'm a week into this job, I'm a high school student, and I'm an entry-level employee. Sure, I can close, but are you really supposed to leave this much cash and the store keys with someone who just quit?" He thought about it for a second, then told me he'd be on his way. When he and his assistant showed up, we exchanged looks, and I walked out. Later, my statement helped the other two win their unlawful termination cases. Edit: the GM store was about an hour to an hour and a half away. He drove a lot that day and was really salty about it.
I was in high school and was working my first job at a gas station that had a coffee place inside of it. Because of high school, I was part-time and my shift was 4 to 9 p.m. One of my classes was a theater class that we essentially did the production side of the school musical that year. When I booked the day of the musical off, my boss told me that if I couldn't find coverage, I would have to work. There were only 2 other workers on the coffee shop side apart from the owner, my boss. I asked both, the only one who could cover me said that I had to take her day shift instead, on a school day. Since I needed to be at the musical to pass the class, I skipped school that day to work at the coffee place. One of my teachers of the class that I was skipping ended up getting coffee that day and recognized me working during school hours. I cried like I got caught doing something wrong, and the owner told me I was holding up the line, so I left. I left the whole line and walked home in my uniform. That experience has colored every job I've ever had. I always remember that bosses will do whatever it takes for you to make their job easier, even if it's knowingly keeping a 15-year-old out of school.
During a hectic sales event, I was part of the fulfillment team. Background: I'm bipolar type 2, lack of sleep makes me manic, HR and management were aware. A teammate dropped the ball on an order, no follow-up with the shipper, no communication with the rest of us. When the customer called us freaking out, she pretended like it wasn't her issue, so we were all yelled at. Another associate and I got it figured out, shipping confirmed and called the customer with management approval to offer a partial refund. They happily accepted, thanking us. When tracked it back to the lazy teammate, but she had been whispering to HR that we were ganging up on her, because we didn't like her. HR person took us, 8 in total, into a meeting room, reaming us for making up stories and lying about whose order it was. Talking about how we are all a team and we should all be responsible for each other. Now we were salary and no overtime, working 60+ a week to complete orders, while Lazy used the excuse that she had kids at home, everyone else did too, so she could not work over 40 hours. Then the HR person pointed at me and called me delusional for thinking that anyone would take my word over lazy associates because, we all know you're crazy anyway. The record stopped right, I stood up and told her thank you. I walked to my desk and sent a company-wide email thanking all the friends I made and the owner for being awesome. Fridays the owner catered breakfast, lunch and dinner to the office as a thank you, pay was good, just long hours away from the family. I said I just couldn't work at a company where laziness was rewarded and HR used personal information against us. All hell broke loose because company-wide goes to the owner and his lawyer. This has gotten long so to end. I was taken care of very well after this and HR rep was demoted to the customer service team.
I had 2 wonderful bosses. They were excellent. One quit on the spot, should have been a huge red flag. I actually work for him now at the new company because he called me after I quit and was like, come work for me. The other moved away. Then there was no management at all. This absolute power-tripping bitch literally assumed control without any authority. She was horrific. I was just 15 minutes late one day because of traffic, legit because there was a guy on the highway trying to commit suicide by jumping off a bridge. I called right when I knew I was going to be a bit late. She formally wrote me up for it. And then my wedding was the next week and she was texting me work-related questions during my wedding. I just did not go back after that. I was also getting anxiety attacks knowing I'd have to see her. Work should not affect your mental health like that.
It was day 1 training for a new job, which involved sitting in a room with a few other people, watching a pre-recorded training video on what the job will be like and what will be expected of us. Pretty cold and impersonal to start, but then the video detailed how we must be obsessive over the minutiae of our job. The way labels face, the ever-present cleanliness of everything, the always smiling customer service in the face of overt customer rudeness. It sounded bleak, mundane, and unbearable. But the kicker was when the video pointed out that we were being constantly surveilled, constantly judged, on all of these things by overlords with access to the cameras that can see everything. We had a lunch break part way into the day, and I just walked out and caught a bus back home. Screw that. I didn't even ask for the paycheck for the few hours of training.
Quality and Health and Safety Manager here. Managing Director asked me to falsify a first article inspection report for a product going to an aerospace company. I said I would not do that. He told me I would if I wanted to continue working there. I chose not to continue working there and reported him to the relevant agencies.
I remember taking a management job with a company that I had to go through 3 in-person interviews to get. It seemed like a pretty good job, money was acceptable, but I wasn't in love with the job or anything. My first day I show up and then they tell me I'm expected to not have a beard. I've had a beard since my early 20s. I asked the person doing my first day orientation why wasn't this mentioned any time during the interview process, and she says, I mean, it's just common sense. I said common sense would be to put appearance expectations in the job description or mention policies during the interviews. She said she didn't see the big deal, and I said, oh, it's not a big deal, good luck with everything, and walked out. 2 weeks later I got a check for an hour's work.
I was about 16 and working in a restaurant that was new and trying to get its legs. I was young in my career and was training for server and sous chef at the same time at this fine dining Italian place. It had a lot of great experience and educational opportunities, so I was all for it, but it had been a month and I hadn't been paid anything except for petty tips. Well, the two owners of this place were old-school Italian guys in different ways. One was more of a coke-head mafioso type and the other was a businessman. I was told the dishwasher called out and I needed to fill in for him instead of server training. I hopped back there and did my damnedest without really knowing how to be a dishwasher. In the middle of the dinner rush, the coke-head owner came into the kitchen freaking out and slapped the back of my head and called me an idiot for not doing such a basic job fast enough. I lost my shit. I turned around and cursed him out. Told him I'm calling the labor board and the health inspector because they had no idea what they were doing. Health inspector didn't get anything, but the labor board had their way with them, and the owner that slapped me was very shortly parted with the business for good.
This was my first job. I was working 40 hours every week until one day I checked my schedule and was only scheduled to work maybe 10 hours. I mentioned how weird it was to my dad, and he advised me that I must have done something, intentional or not, and I needed to talk to my manager. This was a time where I had really bad anxiety and was struggling to stand up for myself, but I made the call. My manager told me that she heard a rumor I was planning on not showing up to work anymore, which was not at all true. I mentioned to a coworker recently that I had a trip to Europe planned that summer. This took place in February, so quite a few months before my trip, and was just wondering if my only option was to quit or if I could still have my job after my month-long trip. For whatever reason, this coworker decided to tell our boss that I was just gonna stop coming to work. I remember being so mad that my boss retaliated without even trying to communicate with me. She apologized and told me I could have my hours back. Unfortunately, I never went back to work after that. LOL, that's what she gets for believing rumors.
Right out of school, I got a job with a video game development company. I asked for what I considered to be a reasonable starting salary, 50,000 Canadian dollars as a software engineer in 2012. They came 15K under and said that if my 3-month probation went well, they'd reevaluate. The 3 months went well. At one point, the CEO told our team that if we met a very lofty sales target 1 month, he'd buy everyone on the team a pair of Bose noise-canceling headphones. We met that target, and he bought them, but he said they were company property so we couldn't take them home. After 3 months, I had a meeting with my boss. They said I was doing a great job, and offered me a 5K raise. I asked for a meeting with the CEO to discuss getting closer to my original ask. This was a startup, getting a meeting with the CEO wasn't a big deal. He asked how much I wanted. I again said $50,000. He responded with, "What, do you drive a Rolls-Royce?" I quit on the spot. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, had no car, and was fresh out of school with $40K in student loan debt. I didn't need to hear that comment from a guy who was worth $20 million. One of my colleagues on my team hooked me up with a friend of his who ran a creative marketing agency, and I went and did web dev for them instead.
I've told this a few times before, so I'll try to keep it condensed. Worked at a Jason's Deli. Everyone there got sent on break/home right before Sunday rush started. We had 2 managers in, me, and a cashier. 1 manager in the office on her phone, 1 manager eating at a table. I try to run the entire line on my own but can't take food out. Manager on the floor tells me take food out. I try, and after I get back to the line one time the other manager is there saying don't run food, keep making tickets cause they are piling up. Both managers go back to their little spots not helping, just occasionally coming every few minutes to tell me to do the opposite of what the other said. Eventually it gets to where both of them are standing on opposite sides of me trying to scream over the other one. Important note, Jason's Deli is a place where you go to the line and order and it's all made in front of you there. We weren't in a kitchen, we were front and center of a crowded restaurant and they were literally screaming impossible things. So I took my apron off, yelled to the store that I was sorry for the wait on everything, but if they have complaints the paper menus had a number to call, and left. The store manager called me the next day saying that he wouldn't fire me if I came back in, and apologized to bitch of the managers. I told him I wouldn't tell corporate to look at the cameras if they both called and apologized to me. That was a lie. I did that before I even left the parking lot.
Worked at a local government office as a temp. I wasn't trained very well. A few days, when the person training me said themselves I really needed at least 2 weeks to be effective. Anyway, I did the job as best I could for 3 weeks or so. The boss returns from leave, and we have a team meeting. He throws in the last 5 minutes of the meeting, in front of everyone, "By the way X, a lot of the work you've been doing is wrong." Not one person mentioned this to me in the 3 weeks I'd been there. I'd barely spoken with most people in the meeting, and this cowardly boss throws me under the bus on the spot and humiliates me. I went for lunch, called the agency and told them to find someone else.
I left a note on the cash register that said I quit and didn't answer their phone calls afterwards. I was hired as a waitress, but I managed a cafe and room service of a hotel all by myself. I was paid as a casual waitress, not a manager. I also had to do the catering service for functions if we had them, in 2 large rooms and 1 small room. At the same time, I begged for help, explained to them it was unsustainable, and got yelled at. I didn't last there long, maybe a few weeks. They were lucky I completed my entire shift before leaving the note. A couple of years later, I was hired for a hospitality gig and my old manager was running the event. She sincerely apologized for her behavior and that of the owner, which led to me quitting. Apparently the owner made her life hell, and she was passing that stress on to me. Fast forward again, and I was at a fancy function at the same hotel, this time for a corporate job. The owner, picture a painfully thin woman with short, frizzy curly blonde hair in her 50s, severe pinched face and pressed skirt suit, navy blue, filled my coffee, and the look on her face was the best. She had more staff thankfully, but to see her having to do catering service, gave me life. It felt like a great full circle moment, smiling at her haggard hollow face as it fell in shock. I basically told my boss he was negligent and should not be practicing engineering. He is my step-grandfather, so I was uninvited from Christmas and family functions. But professionally, I was kinda right. So I didn't have any trouble getting references from past supervisors at the company, and the company fell apart rapidly after I left. No regrets, except I should have done it sooner. Not that I'd recommend it for anyone else. Edit, I forgot to mention that this was 2020, so I did have trouble getting a new job due to COVID economy. I was pretty depressed for a couple months. But in October 2020, I finally got a call from my first choice. Still there, and so much happier.
Was pulled aside and given a written warning for laughing too loud, asked to sign it as acknowledgement. All I said was, "Sorry, not going to do that, today will be my last day." It was only a crappy casual job, which I had planned to quit within a few weeks anyway. Still felt good, haven't had that kind of high in a while. Edit, I think what I said was more along the lines of, "That's okay, I was going to quit today anyway." I'm not one for confrontation usually, so it was a lot more lighthearted than first stated.